Hello, welcome. My name is Katie, and I work at the Novel Neighbor in St. Louis, Missouri, where books, art, and people meet. Thank you for joining us tonight. We've got on debut day Chris Samnee. He's an Eisner and Harvey Award-winning cartoonist, and he's best known for his work on Daredevil, Black Widow, and Thor, the Mighty Avenger. He lives in St. Louis, Missouri with his wife Laura and their 3 daughters. And Chris is here with us tonight to celebrate the release of Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters Volume 1. Yes, there is a Volume 2 already in the works. The book is about Rainbow, who's been looking for her younger sister, Jonna, for over a year since monsters appeared and the world began to dry up. And going from settlement to settlement, Rainbow asks every survivor she meets, "Have you seen my sister?" And then one day, John is spotted out in the wild, filthy but strong enough to knock back a towering monster with one punch. All this time, she's been surviving on her own, without Rainbow, without anyone. But there are more dangers in the world than monsters, and when the 2 sisters reunite, they'll discover the secrets of this new and terrifying world firsthand. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're so excited for Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters, Volume 1.
Thank you for having me. I haven't done an event in a long time, so I appreciate you having me. I'm excited, but very nervous.
Well, don't be nervous. We're a really kind audience here. So my first question is, where did the inspiration for Jonna and Rainbow come from? And I know since it's a family collaboration, I imagine a lot of Jonna and Rainbow come from your experiences with your own daughters.
Yeah, Rainbow is definitely like our oldest, headstrong and very well-read, and will definitely let you know everything that she knows. Jonna is, though, she kind of our feral child, our middle child. She's 8 now, but I started it, ages ago. But yeah, we didn't have our youngest, our 5.5-year-old. She wasn't born yet, but when we started on Jonna, it was mostly our 2 oldest kids. And it's just a matter of all the books that they read. I really enjoyed reading them with them, but I wanted to have something that I have done that was something that they could read too. I've been working in comics for half my life now. And I really wanted to have something that I could work on to be able to share with them. I've worked on some books that were all ages, but I haven't had a chance to work on things that were set in the middle grade market.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea sort of the number of volumes Jonna will experience her journey over?
We have the first 12 issues figured out right now. And I know where things are going to end, but we'll just see how things go.
Because I saw that there was a release date in the back of this one for Volume 2. Yes. So I got excited. I was like, you can't leave me on that cliffhanger.
I just given the last of my color notes for issue 8. So that's going to be the end of our 2nd volume, which there's the cover for it right here. And I think that's already up on the Simon & Schuster site for Volume 2. And I just was working on the layouts for 9 to 12 this past week. So cool. Yeah, the first 12 issues, we kind of know where the whole big arc is going to go so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think, what's one thing you would like Jonna readers to take away from this first volume? Because I know there's a lot of setup going on about Jonna and Rainbow and their sort of post-apocalyptic journey.
As far as a takeaway, gosh, I don't know. I mean, we're still in kind of the middle of it. Mm-hmm. I just want people to have a good time while they read it. There's not so much like, it's not as meaty as a lot of things can be. I kind of wanted to be a sort of a breezy bit of a story where you can kind of leisurely get into it and not have to be weighed down. Our oldest loves reading the giant chapter books, but our middle still likes reading quick comics. Mm-hmm. And They're not super heavy with dialogue. So we kind of wanted this to be an easy breezy sort of fun adventure and not so much what, a whole big heavy story. So it's just, it's just a bit of fun to move on to the next one. So I mean, there's lots of like family, and it doesn't matter who you're born, or where you're born, or who you're from, or where you come from. You can be family with anybody, even if you're not related. There's a lot of bits like that, and there's lots of little bitty parts that you can take away. But overall, it's just supposed to be a fun adventure comic.
Yeah, I thought that one of the fun parts was just how, how small Jonna looks and how fierce and mighty she truly is, that even this littlest person could really be the person to save the day.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter who you are, how big you are, you can still make a difference.
So who would you, I know you're comparing them to your daughters, but who would you identify more with, Jonna or Rainbow, or maybe a different character?
There's a dad who looks a lot like me when he finally shows up. So I guess their dad, the kind of clueless dad, would probably be me. But there's a little bit of me in everybody. I kind of put on a Jonna-sized costume whenever I sit down to draw. I kind of put myself in each character's head while I'm drawing it. I get to kind of act through them. So everybody, I mean, temperament, I could be a real Rainbow, or it could be a Jonna, depending on how I wake up. So there's a little bit of me in everything, and all the monsters are things that I am. This is my therapy, making a comic book. It's all the things that I was, scared of when I was a kid. There's, squids and ants and worms and all the things that, I mean, I grew up in the country, but I still didn't like bugs and all that stuff. So this is all just like me getting it out on paper. And I didn't like chicken eggs because my parents had chickens and they grossed me out. So there's a giant egg that shows up later, and it's all just like me putting it on the page, getting it out of me.
That's awesome, to have such a creative outlet as your job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I've worked on so many other superhero books, and those are all really great, but most of the time it's with another writer, and I'm just trying to help get their vision on paper. But this is all just weird junk out of my head for years, and I can finally just spill it out there.
So that sort of actually goes right into my next question. Sort of, is there a difference in how you approach creating comics for adults versus creating comics for kids, or creating comics for everyone?
Some of the layouts I try to make I got a little artsy fartsy on some of the more adult comics, so I can do like a catty corner, and it might make it a little hard for their eyes to travel from panel to panel, because it's supposed to be like a Z shape to your eye to travel from left to right through a page. And I try and make that easier for younger readers than Jonna, so they're not bouncing around and making it confusing. Like with Firepower, I can switch up my layouts and kind of try and make it a little more kinetic. And I've done it a few times in Jonna. I'm always wary that I've made it too complicated. But really, that's the huge difference between one and the other than just the mindset where I kind of just go, it's a free for all when I sit down and do Jonna. And superhero books, it's sort of, I'm trying to, I don't know. I feel like there's almost a superhero style, and Jonna is just what it feels like coming out of me. Like I don't have to think about it. It's just how I naturally draw. Whereas superheroes, there's almost a preconceived notion of what superhero comics are supposed to look like, and I don't fit perfectly into that, but it's still in the back of my mind when I sit down and draw, like what superhero comics look like, or what other people have. There's a long history of who's drawing comics, and I look up to all those guys, and they all are an influence. But whenever I draw Jonna, I've somehow managed to block all of that out and just do whatever feels right.
That's awesome. It's pure you and pure.
Well, I mean, there's still a lot of influences that come through. There's a lot of European stuff that I like. There's a lot of manga that comes through in all the action scenes. but I think that those influences sort of flow naturally while I'm working on Jonna, whereas opposed to superhero books where it's almost intentional when I sit down. I don't know. I never really thought about it. Now I'm thinking about it out loud. Just speaking of therapy.
Yes, the novel neighbor always likes to ask those, burning questions to make you think.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, I just sit down and do, and you don't really think about it until somebody asks you. I taught little bitty kids when I was in college. I taught 2 art classes just for the community college, and it was 6 to 8 and 10 to 12. And every time I would get kids in class, then I have to realize, like, why do I do these things? I don't know. I have to go find a book and learn how to teach someone because I don't know how I do most of this stuff. I'm self-taught, and I never had a chance to learn why I'm doing things. A lot of it is just gut instinct.
Yeah. So what age would you say you were when you drew your first comic?
5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yeah. I got in early, and I got hooked, and there was no looking back. So yeah, I got really into comics. My grandma bought me some Batman comics, and I was already into Super Friends, the cartoons. And if I had thought that cartoons were something that I could actually do, then maybe I would have gone that route. But for whatever reason, comic books seem to be more tangible, like an actual thing, like that I could do. Whereas somehow cartoons just felt like magic. Like they just move. I don't know how they do it, but comic books they're drawings on paper, and I can make drawings on paper. So, ever since I was 5, I was copying out of comic books and trying to make my own. And I think when I was 12 years old, there was a comic book convention. I started going to conventions with my little portfolios, and whenever I talked to different artists there, they would tell me what size paper I should be drawing on, and they would give me pointers, and I would just go every time there was a convention in town. And eventually I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it at different conventions by the airport. And, most of them were in St. Louis, all the conventions that I went to. And eventually I did enough conventions and talked to enough people that I got good enough that I got a job. My first published work was when I was 16.
Oh, very cool.
But
that's really, to be published at 16 is a big deal.
Yeah, it was really exciting, and there was definitely no looking back after that, because just seeing your work in print was a real watershed moment for me. Like I had to have more of it. It was a drug, like I have to do more now. I can't. And I've been working professionally since I was, let's say, 23. I mean, my first work was when I was 16, and there were some things in between. Most of them I didn't get paid for. But yeah, I had a lot of, little bitty jobs. Like I worked at Emo's Pizza. I worked as a cable guy. I was a custodian at a flea market. Like lots of little jobs that I thought would just help me until I got my full-time comic book job. Like I never wanted to have a career. I just wanted to have just enough that I could get paid, but not enough that I would want to stay doing it. Like I still wanted to stay hungry and be able to make comic books. So, I think 2004 was when I started work on Pody in Kansas. That was for Oni, which is the same publisher that I'm doing Jonna with now. So it's full circle.
Well, and so Jonna, you wrote along with your wife. So I'm wondering kind of what that experience was, going from, have you always been collaborating together, or?
Yeah. She took screenwriting classes when she was in college, and she's a really talented writer, but I don't think she's had a chance to get it out there. And she's always been like almost every email I send, she's helping me like, maybe you should say this or that. She's a great editor that way. And whenever we first started pitching or taking stuff to conventions, she and I worked on a story together, and we took it around to publishers, but we didn't find any traction. And we've always wanted to work on something else together. We have different ideas that we've pitched back and forth and talked about doing someday. And I had been sort of thinking about, this little kid who would fight monsters, and it was just something that I would doodle in sketchbooks and something that kept me busy in between jobs, or to warm up in the morning, something to keep my mind off of whatever my main job was that month. And she got a look at my sketchbook, and she said, "Do you think you have a story for it?" And I told her, the idea, and she said, "Do you have most of it figured out in your head? Maybe we should pitch it." And I said, I think I've got it figured out. And she said, "Well, let's email James Jones at Oni." And I emailed him, and they said that they were game for it. And then when we sat down to start work on it, I realized I didn't have it all. Like, I had a lot in my head, and I had a ton of drawings and lots of work that I thought would amount to a full story, but it wasn't quite all there. Mm-hmm. And she helped me flesh out a whole lot of stuff when we've sent our final pitch document in. And then before we sent it in, it didn't feel right to have her have so much in it without being a part of it. So we pitched it as she and I working on it together, because otherwise it was just like a lot of punching and not a whole lot of other other stuff in there. It was just like me being, a big nerd. I grew up with all the superheroes punching each other, and I thought I had a full story, but I was missing a lot of bits. And yeah, once we got it all put together, and she was helping me type things up, then it became a whole story. And yeah, we're doing it back and forth as whenever we can find the time.
Mm-hmm. So, well, yeah. I mean, it's a pretty awesome book, like for such a cool collaboration. And I can't imagine working with my husband on anything coming out this good.
Well, we collaborated on 3 kids, and they turned out great. So this is
that's another group project too. So since you started at such a young age, drawing your own comics, and I'm sure reading them, what do you wish you knew as a kid that you know now about comic books and creating them?
Gosh, that it's not magic. Like, I kind of put everyone on a pedestal when I was a kid and when I was still trying to break in, and it's just people making books. It's it's I clock in and clock out, and there are no days where you can't just be uninspired. Like, work has to get done. And I think a lot of people, when they think about people making comics, it's just, you're kind of flighty and you can do whenever, and you just do it for fun. And why don't you just draw this thing for free? And there is a lot of joy in it, but it's also a career. And, I work, 6 days a week, and it has to get done. And I think as a kid, if I'd known what I was getting myself in for, maybe I would have chosen a different career path. But I'm glad to be I'm glad to be doing it.
So kind of getting into that, so you say you work 6 days a week. Could you sort of describe maybe your daily routine? What is the day in the life of an artist look like?
Well, lately our youngest, she's 5.5. She's been waking up at 2 to go to the bathroom, and then we get her to bed, and then she wakes up again at 5:30, and she wants to read books. And that's usually when I start my day. We start with a book in the morning, and we make breakfast. And by the time we're done making breakfast, then the other kids are up, and then I make breakfast for them, and then we keep on going. And I usually start my day at work at around 10. and I work until from 10 to noon and make lunches, and I come back to work, and then I work from noon to 4, and then we do dinner and bedtime and baths and all that jazz, and then I come back to work again after everybody's in bed, usually around 10, and then I work from 10 to midnight and then start all over again.
Oh, wow. So that's not a lot of sleep for.
Well, I mean, if I could just get her to sleep, it'd be
Oh,
pretty
I
easy.
know. Yeah.
It's just been the past couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, ideally I'd be going to bed at like 11:30, but I'm working on 2 books. So I'm forfeiting a little bit of sleep so I can do Firepower and Jonna at the same time. I'm doing Firepower for Skybound Image with Robert Kirkman, the creator of The Walking Dead, and that was
Very
something
cool.
that that's I have to sort of balance both of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. How do you sort of switch gears creatively? Because that's like there's probably a big difference in
There,
content.
well, I mean, Robert knows that I wanted to make books for our kids, and I think at the very beginning, the plan was to make Firepower more adult, and somewhere along the way, we just didn't, and it's more teen than
Okay.
than adult. So I mean, like 12-year-olds can read it. I mean, my kids aren't quite ready for it, but
Mhm.
it's not as adult as it could have been.
Right.
But there is sort of a switch that, I mean, I can do one in my day shift and one in the night shift, and that dinner can help me sort of switch gears and reread books and have a chance to play. And by the time I come back to the board, then I'm in a different headspace than I was when I started. So I usually will do inks on one book during the day and layouts for one at night, because otherwise, if I work on layouts for both books, I'll just blow my wrist out. It's different muscles, and it just doesn't work. I'm too old for it.
So what maybe the different uses of muscles, but what most surprised you about becoming a comic creator?
Gosh, the most surprising thing about being a creator, the hours. I as a kid had this grand idea of, I've seen pictures, like the black and white pictures of, a dozen different guys in a studio, and they all had white shirts and ties, and they were all at these giant desks. And I just figured, you'll go in and you clock in and clock out, and then you're done for the day. And I think that's how it used to be. They go in and they bang out their pages, and then they have a cigar and they go hang out with their buddies. And the comics nowadays are more complicated than they were back then. And as much as I love the golden age and the silver age of comics, there's less expectation then than there is now, because they didn't expect those books to live on forever. And nowadays we make these books to be trades, and then the trades have to stay in print, and then whatever you worked on will always be out. And back then it was periodicals, and once they are on the shelf for a month and then just get pitched, they go in somebody's back pocket, and you go to your brother, and then he throws it in the garbage. And it was just, what was the question? I got lost in that one.
No, just what surprised you most about becoming a comic book creator?
The hours are longer because there's more that has to get done. And also, I originally had intended just to be a penciler.
Okay.
So I'm penciling and inking all of my own work on Firepower and on Jonna. And it takes a lot longer than I thought I would work as a kid, but also longer than I should be working nowadays. But yeah, it's everybody says that my stuff is simple, but it gives off the idea of being simple, but there's actually a lot of work underneath it to make it work and with less lines. So less is more.
Definitely. So who would you say, I know you said you like the golden age artists. Were there any artists in particular that you looked up to as a kid, getting inspiring your work now?
Um, I there's a lot of the Batman artists that I was a huge fan of in the '80s, like Norm Brayfogle and Jim Aparo. But as I was a nerdy little kid, and I got so into the artists that were making things that there were magazines that had interviews with them, and I would buy those in bulk, and I would read the interviews and find out who influenced which artist. So Jim Aparo was a fan of Milton Caniff, and then I would go to the library and search who Milton Caniff was, and I found out about Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon, and I got into that stuff, and I found that he was in a studio with Noel Sickles, and it was just I just sort of tumbled down this comic book newspaper strip hole and start finding different artists that way. So Milton Caniff, Alex Toth, Frank Robbins, the really graphic, brushy artists from newspaper strips and comics from back in the day are my biggest influence, I'd say. Alex Toth is probably my number one. Second would be Milton Caniff, who did Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon. And then there's lots of manga that I am into. The old Dragon Ball.
Oh yeah.
Became more of an influence than I realized. I hadn't read it since I was a kid, but after doing Jonna for like 6 months, I go, oh, yeah, that's definitely feels a lot like old Dragon Ball. Like it was, that was a show that I woke up early in the mornings at like 5 or 6 in the morning to watch as a kid, and I guess it just burrowed its way down. And yeah, it started coming out in Jonna. So yeah, it's maybe I think my style is somewhere in between old black and white newspaper strip art and manga and French and European comics. Somewhere in the middle is where you find me. For better or worse.
Oh, I think it's a good place to be.
I feel like it's probably an odd pairing that, all of my influencers are so disparate but I like so many different things, and my style is sort of where everything collides.
Well, and it's a good way to be unique too, because it's only yours from where you've created your own style from where you're drawing from.
Well, it's good now. When I was trying to get in, it was a lot of, this stuff is good, but we have no idea where we'd put you. So I kind of had to carve out my own spot. And, and working on Capote in Kansas, that was just a lot of guys in suits. And I really had to hone my acting on the page, the way to make characters interact and emotions to sell on a face. And that really sort of pushed me into where I am now. And it's not surface, it's not just the style or details or what you can put on a page, but it's how to compose a page and how to make it feel, as if they're actors on a stage and not just pictures.
Right. It really comes alive. What's one piece of advice you'd give to a kid trying to create their first comic book or graphic novel?
Don't wait, just do it. I think a lot of people kind of wait until they have the perfect idea, or they work on this one book that they plan on being 300 pages or 300 issues, and they want this giant magnum opus. Don't wait to do that. If you have a little idea, just do it. I mean, I started at, just a page or 2 pages, and the more you do, the better you'll get, and the longer stories that you can make. But if you can tell a story in a page, you can tell a story in 2 pages, or you can tell it in 6. And eventually you'll be able to tell a whole long story with everything in the middle, and a beginning, middle, and an end. But if you can't do just the first page, you'll never do the 300 pages. So I think a blank white page can be really daunting. And if you just sit down and do it, then you'll get better at it.
So this is one of my fun questions. Zombies, or in this case, Unpossible Monsters attack. Assuming everyone in your family is out safe, what's one object in your house that you're saving?
gosh, one object in my house. Honestly, our 8-year-old, who's very much the Jonna, she made a little statue of Jonna for me.
Oh,
It's about this big. It was my profile picture on Instagram for the longest time. But she made a little Jonna and a little monster for her to go with. But I probably take that. I mean, I have my Eisner. I have awards and stuff. I have like expensive toys and cool things sitting around, and books that are out of print. But I think that's the one thing that I'd probably grab. Every time I work on a book, I have like when I worked on Daredevil, I bought a fancy Daredevil statue to commemorate working on it, and I did the same thing with Thor. And I got a Hot Toys Black Widow when I finished working on Black Widow. It's just something to like, oh hey, these are the books that I've worked on. And I got a really nice Rocketeer when I finished work on that book for IDW. And I said that, like, I don't have anything for Jonna. They don't make a thing because we made this thing. So she made it for me, and it sits over on a little shelf next to me. I'd get it out of there, but I can't get it out of the case. But yeah, it's about.
so cool though.
But it's just one of my favorite things.
That's a really good answer. That's probably the best answer I've heard to that question before. Alrighty, so here's where we enter in some quick rapid fire questions. What's the first comic you remember reading?
A lot of people can remember the numbers, and I'm terrible with numbers. It was either a Batman or a detective, but Two-Face was in it.
Okay.
If I saw the cover, I could tell you. I remember the covers really well, but I don't remember the numbers. But it was a Batman comic from like 1984, 85, somewhere around there. Because if I was 5. So that's the first one I remember. I don't remember the first one that I bought myself either. But yeah, it was definitely Batman.
What's your favorite season of the year?
Fall. Well, gosh, that's tough. I'm a bit of a cynic, so I can always find the worst in different things. Like summer, I hate. I just hate the summer. It's too hot, and the winter. I love the look of winter. I love looking at winter out the window. I love the snow, but I also hate driving in it.
Definitely.
I'd say spring or fall, somewhere around there, where it's not terribly hot and it's not too snowy and dangerous to travel in.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, we had a bad winter this past year, so that I definitely understand.
Well, we lived in Portland for a couple of years, and there wasn't really different seasons. It was just like raining or not raining, and we had snow, just the tiniest bit of dusting of snow in the winter. And then it was just more rain, and I did kind of like that. But I think that eventually Laura was like, I think that I'm kind of done with all the rain, and we were having kids, and we wanted to come back where we had family.
So what's your typical order at a coffee shop?
It's been so long. Black coffee with oat milk.
Okay. What music are you listening to right now?
Honestly, I've been listening to audiobooks while I've been working, and going through a lot of old music that I listened to when I was in high school, like MU330 and a lot of like Less Than Jake and old ska and punk rock music that I listen to. I don't know why all of a sudden this like late 90s has sort of hit me, and it's like, oh, I really need to listen to some NoFX. Maybe I'm hitting a midlife crisis, but I've been
hearing a lot more like 90s hits on the radio lately, so maybe that's it. 90s styles are back in the stores now, so
that's it. Maybe I'm just hip.
Yeah, there you are. You're just, re-entering the hip phase. But now that, stuff that we experienced in the 90s and early 2000s is now cool again. What book would you bring to a deserted island?
The the giant bone collection, the huge thick
Oh
one.
yeah. Mhm.
I could probably carry that, and then I could read it for a long time, and then start all over again. And the kids love it too, so I could let the kids borrow it while while I'm sitting on the sand.
Yeah, well, that's another one that's just like appeals to all ages. Like anyone could read that.
So good.
What's your favorite meal to cook?
Um, hmm. Breakfast for dinner.
Okay, yeah.
You know, waffles and pancakes and sausage and eggs, and you know, that's probably the one that I like to cook the most. Or burgers and fries and mixed veg.
Post COVID, what's the first place you're traveling to?
Laura's parents' house.
Okay.
We've been doing Skype calls with the grandparents for the better part of 2 years now, and the first time that we get out of the house, we gotta take them to go see the grandparents, and then I'm gonna go to the comic shop.
That's
we
a good
just been getting the comics delivered, you know? So I'm still trying to keep up with comics, but I haven't been into a shop to browse in 2 years. So I'm looking forward to just being able to look up on the shelves and just grab something instead of scrolling through a website and trying to pick one from the cover. I want to be able to flip through a comic book again.
Yes. Okay, now a little
Novel Neighbor. Of course, I'm going to go to Novel Neighbor first.
Well, so a little game of this or that. Pie or cake?
Cake.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee, 100%.
City or countryside?
That's a tough one. I grew up in the country, and there's a lot to be said for small town, rural, but I think I'm a city boy now. You know, my grandpa used to say I was a house cat, and I'd just stay in the house, and it didn't matter where I was, where we went. I would sit there and I'd just be reading comic books. But I think I've grown into a city boy, and if I had to pick, I'd go where, you know, I wasn't just looking at animals out the back window.
Well, next one, dogs or cats?
The kids are trying to talk me into a pet. We had a cat, but she passed away a couple years ago. So if we get another cat, it's going to be a tough competition for the last one we had. I'd say cats. Probably cats. But if we get a pet, it's probably going to be a dog coming up.
I have both, so I can never answer that.
Right.
Excuse me. Sneakers or sandals?
Oh, sneakers. But everybody makes fun of. I always wear Chucks. I have flat feet, so Converse All Stars have been my shoe of choice since I was a teenager. On Firepower, Robert Kirkman, my writer, is a real sneakerhead, and he is very into different types of Nike tennis shoes, and he's very specific about which ones he wants, which characters to wear, and I just could not care less about what the shoes are. I don't want anybody to see my toes. I don't want to see anybody else's toes, but I'm not particular about what kinds of shoes I wear. So it's definitely sneakers, but it doesn't matter what they look like. It's whatever hides my hairy toes.
Beach or mountains?
Mountains, because I never learned how to swim.
Oh wow, yeah, that would kind of take out the beach for you.
I mean, it looks really pretty, but being near bodies of water stresses me out.
And like the biggest ones, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Good thing you're in St. Louis.
Well, I mean, we lived, in Portland. There's ocean. We never got that close. We went to the beach once, and not close enough to be in the water. It was too cold that day. So, yeah, mountains for sure.
Alrighty, and last one: ninjas or pirates?
Ninjas. I'm a child of the '80s, so all those ninja movies and Daredevil fought ninjas and Ronin, and there's too many things that are cool with ninjas. I never got into pirates. I mean, I played pirates as a kid, but they didn't have action figures. There's lots of ninja toys that you can play with, but I don't think there was really a whole lot of ninja or a whole lot of pirate things you could play with besides dress up stuff. So yeah, ninjas.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining the Novel Neighbor tonight on launch day for Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters, Volume 1. As I said before, I'm so excited for Volume 2 already.
Oh, thank you.
Can't wait till it comes out. And make sure to order you can get a signed copy from the Novel Neighbor on our website or at the store. And yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Have a good night, everybody.